And we are live. Hello, everyone. This is My Two Cents, and welcome back to your weekly COVID-19 update stream. Unlike all the mainstream media sources where you will be given nothing but the official narrative provided by credible organizations like the World Health Organization and the CDC, we are here to discuss everything that you might not be able to hear anywhere else. And I do want to say up front, I am not a doctor. I am not an expert. I don't claim that anything you hear here is official or 100% true. What I will say is we will discuss the things that you are, for some reason, not allowed to discuss anywhere else. So just kind of a quick recap to everything we've discussed since this whole thing went down. We've discussed how utterly irrational from an economic standpoint shutting down the entire world economy is, how the actions taken by the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, and other central banks around the world show that they know a global economic currency collapse is coming, and they're doing their best to try and consolidate their power over the banking system and, by extension, world governments. We've talked about how the nationalization of industries like 3M, and now, as we're going to learn, the GM, Ford, and meat packing is something we'll talk about this week, is making the United States government more and more a government that owns the means of production, which is funny given we have a president who says that socialism will never come to the United States. He's moving in that direction quite quickly. And we've talked about Bill Gates and Melinda Gates and how they've been putting quite a bit of money towards a project called ID 2020, which the goal of which is, through vaccinations, is to give every person in the world not only quote unquote safety through better vaccinations, but a digital identity that will make your personal identity and personal information so much more safe from ever being stolen. But even if true, it will also basically put an end to any meaningful hope to having privacy. So that's kind of everything we've talked about up to this point. The first thing that happened this week that I would like to discuss is the fact that YouTube censored a video that had almost 5 million views. This video, which was originally aired on ABC News affiliate in Bakersfield, California, had two physicians, Dr. Daniel W. Erickson and Dr. Artin Masihi, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. They were basically coming out and saying that they thought shelter-in-places orders were both unscientific and reckless. They said that the World Health Organization has incredibly mismanaged this thing. And in particular, they talked about how a strong immune system should not be sheltered in place, because if you are constantly sheltering in place, you are not allowing your body to be exposed to diseases, not just COVID-19, but other diseases that it needs to build up an immunity to. And that when this whole shelter in place comes to an end, people, not only is COVID-19 going to have a resurgence, diseases of all sorts are going to have a resurgence because everyone's immune system is being made weaker by sheltering in place. Well, what happened? YouTube pulled the video. And they stated that when asked for a justification for why they pulled the video, they said, "We quickly remove flagged content that violates our community guidelines, including content that explicitly disputes the efficacy of local health authority recommended guidance on social distancing that may lead others to act against this guidance. From the very beginning of the pandemic, we have had clear policies against COVID-19 misinformation and are committed to continue providing timely and helpful information at this critical time." YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki has stated very clearly on television that she has every intention of banning any quote-unquote misinformation that is placed on YouTube, which she defines as information that contradicts the World Health Organization. Mark Zuckerberg has likewise stated that Facebook is working very aggressively to, quote this, to stop the spread of this quote-unquote harmful misinformation, because you, the viewer, are far too stupid to know what you need to do. The only solution is to ensure that people only get their information from the World Health Organization.
Oh, wow. A very vaguely worded policy being used to prey and victimize people who are simply pushing forward information that is contradictory to the official narratives. Who could have possibly predicted that this kind of censorship would lead to a single monopoly on a narrative? It's very unusual. I mean, come on, we all knew that this was going to happen. And of course, what they're saying actually makes sense, because you're not really flattening the curve, as is the narrative being pushed forward by getting all these shelter-in-place rules. You're getting all of these. You're basically creating a broadening of the curve where this thing is going to go on for significantly longer than it otherwise would have. I mean, I don't even know a time in history when there was a quarantine in place where people quarantined the healthy. It's even funnier. It's just like this entire thing is just from the very beginning was full of misinformation and absolute nonsense. We shut down basically the entirety of the US economy because some guy named Fauci predicted that we would get 2 billion deaths from COVID-19 at a time when the United States hadn't even reached 100 yet. Of course, this is the same Dr. Fauci who has a proven track record of severely overestimating how terrible outbreaks are going to be. I believe he predicted that there would be thousands of deaths from the Ebola outbreak in 2014 in the United States. He predicted that swine flu would have something around 100,000 to like 500,000. And he predicted, I believe he also predicted that SARS would also kill thousands of people in the US when, again, if you look at the actual numbers, hardly bears it out. So this guy is a career of being a fear monger. The difference is that this time it's, for some reason, someone had decided to take this absolute charlatan, this complete and utter amateur of an epidemiologist. Seriously.
We never got it right before, but don't worry, we'll get it right this time. How many a politician has said that?
Oh, it's basically a running theme at this point.
And what's
you gotta
funny,
love. Sorry, you're gonna say something?
Go ahead. I was going to say the official sources are the World Health Organization and the Center for Disease Control. People very quickly forget that initially the World Health Organization backed the Chinese government's narrative that coronavirus could not be transmitted human to human, and therefore there was no reason to be alarmed. They explicitly backed that the narrative that this came from a wet market in China and had nothing to do with a lab in Wuhan, even though now U.S. intelligence agencies have even been forced to admit that the virus came from that the evidence is showing this virus came from a lab in Wuhan. They're still saying it looks like it was an accident, not anything that was planned. But as we've already discussed, it's even if I can't prove it was planned, it certainly has benefited governments worldwide. So
the World Health Organization is. Sorry, you're going to say something?
Yeah, why do people still trust these guys? Why do people still, these agencies have proven that they are completely untrustworthy. They get the numbers wrong all the time. They get results wrong all the time. Why do people still trust these guys? I mean, God, it really should be an official statement. If a government agency says something, you can count on it to be false. You can count on it to be a lie. People should not be stomaching this anymore, and yet they do for some unknown, ungodly reason. I don't get it. God.
I mean, I can tell you why. Because we're living because they want people to forget. It's very convenient for them to forget. I'm trying to look up the passage right now. I can't seem to find it, but this reminds me very much of the scene from 1984, which first introduced the concept of the memory hole, where what would happen is that the hero, I forget his name, was working in the Ministry of Truth, which is, of course, the perfect name. And what they would do is whenever any politician, government official, or just someone who the official narrative needed the people to believe was 100% accurate all the time, made a prediction or said something that didn't turn out to be true, the reprints and reproductions of their speeches, the archives of the newspaper articles would always be redacted and replaced with information that turned out to be correct, and what they originally said was going to be just completely destroyed. So, for example, if the politician predicted that there would be, 30 million pounds of chocolate produced by this fall, and it turns out that there were 20 million produced, then and all archives of the speeches, all transcripts would be
Burned.
All passages related to that 30 million prediction would be burnt, would be cut out, and then replaced with the 20 million to make it look like that they were telling the truth all along. The actual information, yeah, that was basically just thrown down a chute into an incinerator. Down the memory hole it goes. Everybody's just going to completely forget. And even though these people have a proven track record of being absolute and complete liars consistently, with an obvious and clear conflict of interest, if you spend even 10 minutes looking up who controls what, where their funding comes from, you'll understand very quickly that these people are largely controlled by the Chinese government. And I still remember that video of some journalist talking to a World Health Organization official, and they asked about Taiwan and the outbreak still going on in Taiwan, and the person just pretended that the official just pretended that he couldn't hear what she was saying at all.
Of course, the reason being because the Chinese government does not recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation. They believe it should belong to China.
Very much so.
Oh, yeah.
So, I think this is what's going on. A lot of people are scared, frightened by the propaganda being put forward by the mainstream media. They're absolutely terrified. And all the propaganda that is similarly reinforced in every place of business that they go to. They see all of the hand sanitizer stations literally everywhere, all the hand wipes, all of the little announcements that are blaring on loudspeakers in grocery stores all across the country. Yeah, don't forget to practice good social distancing every 5 minutes.
I'm seeing hashtag stay at home
creates
all the freaking time. It's getting annoying, but yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And you have constant commercials. It's just an endless bombardment of people needing to be reminded to do certain things. It very much creates a panic, creates uncertainty. And when that happens, you go watch the news. And what does the news say? Trust your leaders, trust the officials, trust the experts. They always know what's best for you because they just love you. This, of course, is an absolute complete lie. And anyone who even spends 5 seconds trying to figure out what the motives and interests are of the people who are actually supposed to be, quote unquote, loving us, you'll realize that they don't love you at all. And at best, they're indifferent to your very existence. But that said, what's really going on here is that they're being told to trust these people, and that whenever there's information about how the World Health Organization is wrong about this thing. Oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist. The best you can possibly hope in terms of a coherent response is that, oh, that's just one guy. It's just one little public official who's completely inconsequential and is totally not the head of our entire organization.
Yeah, and I've said this before, but it bears repeating. If you really believe you are correct, you have absolutely nothing to fear by people contradicting you. If the World Health Organization was so confident that they were right, why not, I don't know, make a response video to this viral video that these doctors in California made? Use the facts, point out, cite the data that you have, show that it's more reliable, prove that what they said was wrong. And the smart population should be able to view both videos and determine who they think is right. But no, it's not enough. We have to make sure that people don't hear the information at all. The only possible reason to be scared of people hearing false information is if it's actually true, but you don't want people to realize it.
I mean, good ideas don't require deception. They don't require force to get people to agree with them. The fact that it needs to be censored at all as misinformation, as opposed to just simply responded to with actual facts and information. I mean, YouTube is very well known for its high quantity of debunking videos, which we've all participated in at some point. So why not put that forward? Why not use your legion of bots to get that up to 10 million views? By just having bots clicking refresh over and over again. And anyways, yeah, the fact is that YouTube, Google, and just generally their handlers are all confessing that they know that what's being told is absolute bullcrap, which is why they gotta lie, and they gotta pretend, and they gotta censor, because if the truth gets out, well, they're screwed.
Exactly. Once the cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in.
It's also very interesting how fragile their narrative seems to be, that it can be debunked by two doctors in California putting forward a rather low quality, off the cuff video of them just talking.
All right, and another thing we should note about the World Health Organization. This same World Health Organization, these experts, these people that you need to undyingly swear your allegiance to and do everything they possibly say. There was an article published April 30th, 2020 at Zero Hedge. New World Health Organization guidelines encourage European kids under 4 be taught masturbation and gender identity. In other words, the World Health Organization, these health experts, these people that you need to trust everything they say, want your children under the age of 4 to be taught about masturbation and transgenderism before they've even really fully learned speech capabilities.
I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, I can understand very much the health benefits of pedophilia.
Yeah. God. Wow.
Yeah, these people sound totally trustworthy and have your best interests at heart, don't they? That they are overtly recommending kitty diddling as part of their health guidelines. I mean, tell me again that the political ruling class is not full of fucking pedophiles.
Oh, don't you dare say that, because we all know that just makes you a crazy conspiracy theorist. I mean, it's not like we know what Jeffrey Epstein was setting up for the political ruling class.
Well, I mean, that's why he had to die, because he was going to reveal a lot of very inconvenient things about a lot of very powerful people, about the fact that the entire political ruling class supports itself on basically mutually assured destruction should one of them step out of line, because they have the evidence necessary to indict them as a pedophile, which is, to nobody's great surprise, one of the worst things you can possibly be. I mean, I don't think it's controversial to say that even in prisons for all levels of security, pedophiles are the lowest of the low.
Oh yeah.
They prisoners actively go out of their way to hunt down, pester, harass, and kill pedophiles, just because that's kind of thing is not tolerated. And there are even prison guards who are just like, who will happily look the other way when a pedophile is getting the crap beaten out of him.
Mm-hmm. Even the most cold-blooded murderers recognize recognize how sick what pedophiles are doing is.
Oh yeah.
But again, you know, it goes to show, and this should go without saying, but I think people don't think about it enough. No one will ever have your own interests will be thinking more about your own interests than you are. These organizations, there is no person, there is no organization in the world so altruistic that they only think about the good of others without giving a thought to their own to their own well-being. If these are the question you need to ask when evaluating how trustworthy these organizations are is, do they have anything to gain by propagating the narrative they're propagating? And in the case of the World Health Organization, the Chinese government, even the US government, and every government worldwide, clearly they have something to gain by propagating this particular narrative. If they didn't, they would not be working so hard to silence other narratives. And
but my 2 cents, don't you know, all this kitty diddling is simply being recommended just because they love you and they want what's best for your kids. I promise.
Oh, yeah.
You can trust them. I mean, with the World Health Organization that is totally not owned and controlled by the Chinese government and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, would there be any conflict of interest in there at all to lie to you? And if you think that they are, then you're a crazy conspiracy theorist, and we should just dismiss all of the opinions and everything you have ever said for the entirety of your life.
Just remember,
exactly.
double think, like in 1984. Double think. It never happened. It's not happening that way. The government loves you. Just double think, and it will all go away. And unfortunately, a lot of people believe that.
I mean, this is what it felt like during the end of the Soviet Union. You talk to Soviet citizens, like towards the later days, it's like the entire world felt completely insane, where everything that they thought was true turned out to be false the next day, and you couldn't watch the news without literally going mad, or at least that's what they said. And I think this is kind of what this. I think this is what it feels like. This is what the end of the. This is what the end of the state. This is what late stage statism looks like. You can't watch the news without actually going mad because everything they're saying is at least even intrinsically understood by people to be a complete lie. You ask anyone on the street, they know that they can't trust the mainstream media, but for some reason they're going to continue to watch it. And for them, it's like they're experiencing a massive amount of cognitive dissonance because everything that they've been taught in school is being proven to be false right before their eyes in real time, and they don't know how to explain it. I mean, for me, it's like I understand everything that's going on. It makes perfect sense to me because I see reality for what it is. I've got the they live glasses on, and I can freaking see what the hell is going on. So it makes perfect sense to me. I don't feel any cognitive dissonance at all. I'm not confused. I might be annoyed because I'm sick of hearing this freaking propaganda about practice good social distancing. But at the very least, like once you understand how the state works, that they operate that they're entirely self-motivated by power, then yeah, everything that they're doing makes absolute and perfect sense.
Yeah, I know there's a video that I'm pretty sure it started on Instagram, but it's been circulating around a number of other social media platforms this week. And it's a woman is standing in front of a bunch of microphones, and she's like, "Okay, I'm here to counter all the confusion that's out there about COVID-19. First, all businesses need to remain closed, except for those businesses that don't need to remain closed." And it's like everyone should practice social distance, unless, of course, there are situations where you should not have to practice social distance. And basically, it's like for 10 minutes, she goes on and says something and then says the exact opposite of what she just said. And it's hilarious because you realize this is exactly what the mainstream media is doing. They tell you to do something one day, then the next day they tell you to do the exact opposite. There's no rhyme or reason to it to the average viewer until, like you just pointed out, you realize that the narrative is flowing in a specific fashion to ensure that the state continues to keep growing its influence and gaining more and more control over the lives of its citizens.
Now I'm going to make a recommendation to both you guys and to the audience. Have you guys been wearing masks when you're out in public?
No.
I have not.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I'm going to assume that the overwhelming majority of us aren't either, because we know what's actually going on. So, have any of you been asked why you aren't wearing a mask when out in public?
I have not to this point.
No, not yet.
I didn't think so because, I haven't either. But I'm going to give a recommendation of what you should say when you do eventually get accosted by some annoying idiot for not wearing a mask. You just say, "I don't have it, and if I sneezed on you, you wouldn't get it."
Right. Well, and even on the topic of the masks, in some states, including mine, police are going after people when they don't practice the social distancing, when they do take their kids outside, like to a park or something like that. And I've noticed something about the cops and about most of the the government emergency workers here and elsewhere. They're not wearing masks either. They don't wear masks at all. It's like they're enforcing these laws, but it's like they don't have to fucking follow these laws. And that is totally government hypocrisy. That is just government hypocriticalism to the very end, in my opinion.
Night shift.
Yeah.
Why are you surprised?
I'm not at this point. I'm not. It's just, hello. Can people not fucking see this? Can people who are not on my end, can they not see the hypocrisy here? It's like, God damn.
Cockroaches can get away with murder. What makes you think that there's somehow going to be an exception to them observing mask or social distancing guidelines? Of course, there's not going to be.
No, and I get it. I just wish other people did too. God.
I mean,
one thing I should say about masks is that for quite the number of cities and counties and states, this is the ultimate catch-22, because under normal circumstances, in most counties and cities have some kind of ordinance against wearing a mask in public that obscures your face. And the justification for that is criminals wear masks when they commit crimes so that they can't be identified. So if you pass a law saying that it's illegal to wear a mask in public, you thereby reduce the chance that people will wear masks while they're committing crimes, or so that's the logic. But now these same cities and county governments and state governments are passing laws saying you must wear a mask out in public for your own safety, all the while ignoring the fact that the laws on the books currently say that it is illegal to wear a mask in a public setting like that. So you have now just created a situation where all your citizens, if they leave their homes, no matter what they do, will be breaking the law. And the cops, of course, can choose which law they're going to enforce at a given time. I can't possibly see how this could be abused.
I mean, it's been this way for a very long time, unfortunately. It's just that now the absolute idiocy and the impossibility of being totally compliant with U.S. government legislation is now becoming a lot more obvious for people. I mean, I think you've already heard the example of how it is impossible to engage in commerce and not be in violation of antitrust legislation, right?
Oh, yeah. Walter Bach tells the great joke. He says there are three business owners sitting in jail, and they ask each other what they're doing there. And the one says, well, I had my prices higher than everybody else's, so they charged me with price gouging. And the next guy says, oh, my prices were lower than everybody else's, and they charged me with predatory pricing. And they look at the third guy and say, what are you for? And he said, well, I charge the same price as everyone else, and they charged me with collusion.
And that's very much the case. That everyone, as the saying goes, everyone commits 3 felonies a day. And it's just a question of which of the 3 felonies are they going to arbitrarily determine you to be guilty of at any one time. I mean, the legislation and just police are not there for your benefit. Obviously, they're not there because they love you and they want you to be safe. That's their justification for it. But we know it's going to be it's absolutely not true, and it's entirely just a system of predation and funding the government.
And it's not like the government hasn't even said this explicitly. I've talked about this in my video, The Case for Private Police. But the U.S. Supreme Court, excuse me, not the U.S. Supreme Court, but I believe it's the District Court for Washington, D.C., the court just under the Supreme Court, explicitly stated that the police do not exist to protect, it has absolutely no obligation to protect individuals. They exist only to protect the quote-unquote public, whatever that means, and that private interests have little to nothing to do with the police's operation.
They're there to protect the state, nothing more.
Exactly.
They're there to serve the state and protect the state, nothing more.
Well, the public is fortunately a nebulous concept, a collective that doesn't have an identity. It doesn't have a face. Nobody speaks for it. A lot of people can claim to speak for it, but ultimately it's just an entirely meaningless piece of rhetoric that is just incredibly convenient for people to basically insert their own ideas about the public, and they think, oh, well, I'm the public, so they're there to protect me. No, they're not. You're not the public. Someone may arbitrarily deem you to be as part of the public. Someone else might, but ultimately, whether or not you are the public is going to be up to the arbitrary discretion of police officers, who, by the way, don't even need to justify anything just to arrest you. They can just pull you over and say that you're resisting arrest and therefore arrest you.
There's always some stock excuse they can give for why they pulled you over, and then, as we just pointed out, no matter what, there's always something they can find to arrest you for. So, All right, well, moving on. Next thing to discuss. So we've talked about how at this point the Defense Production Act has been invoked quite a few times. First, it was invoked to get General Motors and Ford to start producing ventilators. Ventilators that, might I add, the government of New York said we absolutely are in dire need of, and people are going to die if we don't get them right now, only to be told several weeks later, oh, sorry, I guess we really didn't need those ventilators. But, by this point, it's too late. Those industries have already been nationalized. We talked about
one thing real quick about the ventilators. Sorry to interrupt.
Go right ahead.
You have the doctors in New York who are saying, no, keep the ventilators away because 90% of the people that we put on ventilators die.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a question about whether or not they're even helping anyways. But we talked about 3M, who is exporting N95 respirator masks, only to be told by President Trump, don't you dare give those respirator masks to other countries. I'm nationalizing all of 3M to ensure that 3M can only produce masks for people in the United States. Of course, the leadership of 3M warned President Trump that if he took this action, other countries might retaliate and it might have negative economic effects on the U.S. But never mind, because now 3M has been nationalized and is only making masks for the good people of the United States. Well, this week, as it turns out, many meat processing plants throughout the United States are starting to shut down due to COVID-19 outbreaks. Employees are sick and unable to come to work. There's also the question of whether or not the meat itself is going to get infected. Well, Donald Trump has again this week invoked the Defense Production Act, and now meat processing plants are going to be told you will have people come to work because, of course, meat and food is an essential service. Therefore, it is the job of the government to make sure everyone gets everything they need. Of course, we've already seen how poorly they mismanage the need for ventilators. We already see how they were warned about the economic backlash that may come from nationalizing 3M. And we know from all of history that whenever the government tries to centrally plan the economic needs of the people, it fails miserably, resulting in huge surpluses in one place and huge shortages in another. But hey, what could possibly go wrong when we're dealing with the food that people need to eat?
It's funny because although this executive order is fairly new, it's actually a couple days old at the time of this recording. So as a result, you have a bunch of meat processing plants that are already forced to be open. The tricky part is that they're having serious trouble meeting production for the simple fact that employees don't want to come to work for multiple reasons, mind you. There's the fact that, and I don't know if we talked about this last week, but there's a lot of employees that are outright being asked to be laid off because they're actually getting more money from unemployment now than they would be at work.
I've heard to the CARES Act.
And one thing that I remember I was talking to someone on Discord who said that they actually did get laid off and they're earning twice as much as they did before, which I'm just going to go ahead and give the amount that they said, about $800 a week. So that's about $3,200 a month, which is pretty good.
Pretty good for not working.
Pretty good for not working. So, it's definitely more than I make. But, but that said, another reason that they wouldn't want to come to work is the fact that thousands of meatpacking employees have already come down with COVID, and, well, they're spooked. Whether or not they have a right to be, I don't know. I'm going to assume that they have a rational reason for doing so. Either way, they're spooked. They don't want to come to work because they don't want to get sick. And yeah, they're really struggling. I'm just very worried because the way the Defense Production Act is worded and the way that this executive order is passed, I can foresee a thing in the not too distant future where the President of the United States is going to sign an executive order ordering these employees to go to work and essentially making it a crime by imperial decree, no less, to not go to work. Essentially federalizing them as employees and conscripting them to do their jobs. Let me just strip away the terms and rhetoric real quick to explain what this really means. I think they're going to start enslaving people.
Yeah.
Yes, when you are forced to go...
Well, no, I just wanted to say, President Donald Trump said America will never be socialist. He immediately makes America freaking socialist. Oh, God, why are people not catching on to this? Oh, God.
Oh, but how could the Constitution have allowed this to happen? Maybe because the Constitution didn't work. Yeah, maybe because the Constitution actually permits this or is otherwise ineffective at stopping it.
In the words of Lysander Spooner, the Constitution either allows for the form of government we have had or it was powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is not fit to exist.
It's not like there's a constitutional amendment specifically against slavery. Oh, no, but it's not slavery when you're conscripting people to go to work. Now, that's not saying that this is already happening, but I can definitely see this being done as vital industries start bleeding employees, or what they arbitrarily deem to be vital employees.
It's not slavery. We're just forcing people to work against their will.
Yeah, that's totally different, you guys. Totally different.
Mm-hmm. And no. And if Rick from Rick and Morty is like, well, that just sounds like slavery with extra steps. they'll just shoot anyone who says that. They'll just shoot anyone who says that, or call them a crazy conspiracy theorist. And yeah.
Although when thinking about this, I did come to an interesting realization, and that is if you are conscripted by the federal government to work at a vital industry, you should do it. You know why? Because they're still going to be paying you, and because you're a federal employee, you're going to be incredibly difficult to lay off. Do you know what this means?
No one's ever going to get fired ever again?
Kind of, but think about all the things you can get away with doing, or rather all the things you can get away with not doing as a federal employee who is required to be there by legislation. You can literally just stand at the assembly line looking at your phone for 8 hours and get paid to do that.
Hell, maybe AOC was a prophet. I don't know. She was the one pushing narratives like this, and hell, maybe she's a prophet because it's certainly happening. She's certainly getting what she wanted. Wow.
In other words, yeah, the federal government, in their attempts to enslave people, are simply going to get a whole bunch of incredibly lazy people like me who are just going to be on the internet checking Discord and YouTube all day.
They can write you up, but they can't fire you.
They can write you up, but I mean, like, I'll happily use those write-up slips as toilet paper, since toilet paper seems to be in short supply these days.
All right, moving on. Next article I would like to take a look at. This is a study coming out of the United Kingdom, which shows that approximately 18,000 extra cancer deaths are possible per year due to COVID-19. So here's quoting from the article, which was published at zerohedge.com. A new study concludes that there could be 18,000 extra cancer deaths in the UK within a year because victims are not able to get screenings and treatment due to the focus on COVID-19. Quote, delays in diagnosing and treating cancer could hurt the survival chances of thousands of people across England, joint research by University College London and the Health Data Research Hub for Cancer suggests. Scientists analyzed data from more than 3.5 million patients and discovered that the COVID-19 outbreak could indirectly lead to more than 17,900 extra cancer deaths within a year, including 6,270 fatal cases in newly diagnosed cancer patients.
I think you're forgetting something very important there.
Which is?
That's a crazy conspiracy theory. And the idea that anything the government does would ever lead to unintended consequences, including additional entirely unnecessary deaths as a result of their actions. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, we all know that the government consists of experts. Who are these experts? What are their qualifications? How do we know they're experts? I don't know, but if they're in the government, they got to obviously know what's best. And so if you don't think that the government is always cognizant of every single problem and has not already taken measures to ensure that any problems that might arise are taken care of with absolute perfection, then you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist. And I'm definitely not some lunatic idiot who thinks that with a blind faith in government, who has completely substituted my cognizant thinking versus simply a new form of religiosity.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, of course, because, every day you turn on the TV, you hear about how many COVID-19 deaths there are. Oh, look at how horrible it is. This is why we've got to keep social distancing. Of course, the moment anyone suggests, well, it may be the case that other causes of death are actually going up because you're shifting all your resources to COVID-19, never mind all the suicides that are taking place and as a result of the economy being shut down, people losing their jobs and their businesses. And we all know with the economic calculation problem, it is absolutely impossible for the government to be in possession of enough information to know what all the consequences of its shutdown are going to be. Yet, like as Filthy just said, if you even suggest that it might actually be making matters worse overall in terms of death and other negative consequences, you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist. Of course, this also reminds me of something I almost forgot to talk about this. But John Miltimore at the Foundation for Economic Education published an article about this earlier this week. And he basically pointed out that when it comes to the total death tolls that hospitals around the country, at least in the United States, but I'm sure it's true in other countries of the world as well, hospitals in the United States actually have a direct incentive to produce more deaths as a result of COVID-19. And the reason for that is the more people die at your hospital as a result of COVID-19, the more money you are entitled to under the CARES Act. So now nurses and doctors throughout departments throughout the intensive care units and the emergency departments in hospitals are basically being told, if somebody dies, do everything you can. Like if they had or even might have had COVID-19, be sure you put, regardless of whether or not that had anything to do with why they died, be sure you put that on their death certificate, because that secures us more money under the CARES Act.
And that's another thing that's probably a very good thing that was found out, because I mean, we've known for a while now from both statements of public officials as well as various other studies and doctors coming out saying that if you die of a heart attack and you test positive for COVID-19, that'll count as a COVID-19 death. And I can extrapolate that to say that if you get shot in the head and you have COVID-19, they're going to count that as a COVID-19 death, even though the cause of death was blatantly, obviously something else, completely unrelated to any complications that might have come about because of COVID-19. So it makes absolute sense that, given that there is a direct financial incentive for hospitals, because they get kickbacks, from kidnapping children and putting them in foster care, or getting kickbacks from having COVID-19 deaths on their files, you can very much see that they're just going to do what's in their best financial interests and not what's in yours.
Again, you want to know why people are saying what they're saying or doing what they're doing? Ask yourself the question, is there some kind of financial incentive? Who really stands to benefit the most? And you'll understand why people are doing what they're doing. This is, of course, the classic case people always point to about how financial incentives influence behavior is it was in India, wasn't it, where the British government was trying to get rid of cobras. So they told the population, if you bring a cobra's head to the government, we'll pay you. And then, of course, people actually started breeding cobras just so that they could turn them in to make money.
Yeah, That's the perfect example of incentives. Hell, I would not be surprised if they don't test people who die there at all and just say, like, oh, this was a COVID death. Where's the test? It was a COVID death. Trust me. I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. I can't prove it, but something I can totally see what would be happening. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised.
Actually, in the comments here, Luna Protege makes a great point. Here, I'm pulling the comment up. Suicide gets treated as a COVID-19 death, as well as suicide getting treated as a COVID-19 death. Because, of course, if you committed suicide, you must have done it because of COVID-19.
Well, given that given that we have 30, 40 million unemployed now, according to the amount of people that have filed for unemployment benefits, which
I believe we have officially passed the threshold in the Great Depression.
Yeah, and I think I'm actually thinking about making a video about how unemployment now is actually worse than during the Great Depression. Not because of sheer percentages, but just because of during the Great Depression. And I remember reading an article about this on Mises, that during the Great Depression, although the Fed did cause a bubble that burst, and you had a trade problem created by the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, it was still largely a result of economic decisions made by consumers, made by the markets, on what industries and what businesses specifically were going to fall apart. So it was basically a somewhat market-driven downturn. Now compare that to today, where what industries and which businesses fail and which don't are entirely driven by states and municipalities deciding arbitrarily which businesses are essential and which are not. You have a downturn that is completely being socially engineered by central planners, in addition to, the actual social engineering. And so as a result, there's no real drive for industries that are inefficient, where labor is least needed, for them to recalibrate their capital, reallocate their resources towards more things that are more productive. And instead, you just have capital and labor being laid off and reconfigured based entirely on the arbitrary whims of central planners, which, as we know, because of the economic calculation problem, they can't do it based on what is actually efficient, because the efficiency signals they would need to make that kind of decision are simply not available under central planning.
And you know what? On that note, as we're getting closer to the end of the hour, I do want to talk about this. I mentioned last week on each of these streams, I want to mention what the current U.S. national debt is and what the current Fed's balance sheet is. I'm taking a look at usdebtclock.org. Currently, the U.S. national debt is listed as 24,943,853,300,000 and growing. So the U.S. national debt is about to hit 25 trillion. And let me quick look up the Fed's balance sheet. And according to this, the Fed's balance sheet has just hit 6.7 trillion. So it's up almost 100 billion from last week.
Suffice to say, yeah, they're screwed. There's no coming back from this. And even if they do try to go back to normal, it's basically just going to wipe out the U.S. federal budget in terms of the deficit spending alone.
Yeah. Like Filthy was just saying, the market always wins out. When the government messes up with the natural supply and demand that occurs when people seek to exchange their own goods and services, all it does is temporarily disrupt the system, at which point the market seeks to correct itself based on the real amount of goods and services. Now, the government can keep, as it has, we saw in the Great Depression, we saw in 2008, and as now we're really seeing now, the government will try as long as it can to prevent the market from correcting itself. They do this primarily through printing more money and putting it into the appropriate sectors that they want it in, and they might be successful in staving off the inevitable recession for a really long time, but regardless of how long they're quote-unquote successful, and it's funny because, the neo-Keynesians and proponents of modern monetary theory, the longer the economy goes without a recession, they always say, libertarians have been saying that the economy is going to collapse, but look, it didn't happen. Well, the bottom line is the more successful they are, it only ensures that the coming recession and the coming crash is going to be even worse. Because at the end of the day, supply and demand wins out. The government can print more money. The government can hold guns to people's heads and tell them, you will perform this business, you will not perform that business. But at the end of the day, the government cannot create goods and services with the flick of a pen. Therefore, no matter what, eventually supply and demand will win out and the crash will come.
I mean, their motivation now is just to keep the lights on for another 5 minutes. I've been saying that for a while now because, I mean, you can see it with your own eyes, that they're very much becoming penny pinchers in terms of fines, in terms of figuring out what ordinances locals are violating, just so they can get that very necessary $1.29.
I've been thinking I want to make a video specifically about modern monetary theory because given the direction the government is going in its response to this crisis, proponents of modern monetary theory like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and others are saying more and more, modern monetary theory is essentially what the government is doing right now. Why not just go ahead and go with it? And for those of you who are not familiar, I can't possibly do it justice quickly, but essentially modern monetary theory effectively removes any distinction between monetary policy and fiscal policy and basically says that the government should no longer collect taxes to fund itself. Basically, anytime the government needs something, it should just print the money to pay for that. Of course, printing money and expands the currency supply, which could lead to inflation. So then the government should tax the people to ensure that the money supply doesn't get too big. So effectively, what it's saying is that taxes are not to fund the government. Taxes are to drain money out of the economy and prevent hyperinflation, thereby ensuring that the government can fund itself limitlessly by just printing more money. Now, granted, that really is what the government's been doing for the past several decades. It's just that politicians are now actually getting bold enough to admit that's what they're doing.
Naturally. And the idea that somehow you can just keep this going endlessly, I mean, why? What possesses them to think that this works? What series of events leads someone to arrive at this obviously ridiculous conclusion?
Quite the opposite, in fact. There are numerous empires throughout history who tried this, and in every case, the currency went into a hyperinflation and collapsed very shortly after which the government itself collapsed.
I mean, we know why it exists, because someone needed to come up with a quasi-scientific explanation that justifies government spending and government largesse. And so they came up with modern monetary theory because Keynesianism wasn't retarded enough. And now, yeah, like they're at the point where that even simply printing physical cash cannot fund the government fast enough. And so they want to move to a digital currency where they can just add zeros to the balance sheet to effectively be able to print as much money as there is memory storage on their data banks.
And again, I would suspect the state strategy now. I hope they don't succeed, and I don't think they're actually going to be quite as successful in trying to do this as they'd like. But I suspect, people that are running the central banks, the politicians in government, they're not stupid. They know that a hyperinflation is coming. I suspect what they are going to do when that happens is, okay, the U.S. dollar failed, but here, everybody accept this digital wallet, and we'll give you some of this new Fed coin, and we can just move forward using the new currency. Don't worry about it. And if people are sufficiently panicked enough, they just might fall for it.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, yes.
Now, here's something that's I wanted to talk about before we start wrapping this video up. And that is an article from, the right-wing radical anarchist think tank called CNN about why some kids are happier now. And as it turns out, when you don't put kids into an endless meat grinder of conformity, of regimentation, of scheduling, and of grading constantly as a full-time job, while at the same time making them do hours of homework a day, forcing them to wake up earlier in the morning than they health-wise should, and just generally creating a wedge between the relationship between the parent and the child. Who would have thought kids are actually happier? They're more well-behaved. They're more independent, and they're generally experiencing a very higher quality of life. Because guess what? Kids want to spend time with their parents. Who would have thought? It's a big mystery how this could have come about, though. It's almost as if keeping kids out of a Prussian model of education is a good thing.
For those interested, that article was published in CNN by an author named Elisa Strauss on Monday, April 27th. I'm honestly shocked that CNN was actually willing to publish this, especially considering Harvard University is hosting lectures about how dangerous homeschooling is to children.
Oh, God. Wow.
Which, of course, we know people are actually figuring out homeschooling works, and even parents that never thought about homeschooling, given their children are at home during social lockdown, they're actually realizing, hey, homeschooling could actually work, and kids are actually happier. Who would have thought?
Well,
yeah,
in public school,
as a result, a lot of kids, at least reportedly, are experiencing a lot less anxiety. Depression rates are going down, and sure, it's too soon to come up with a definitive scientific explanation of this, but at least the reports show that this is very promising.
Well, and here's the thing. Public schools, they're run on the same principles as prison, the same principles and rules as prisons are. It's just the government using it's the government using prison guidelines to run the public schools. So it's really not surprising that children are now happier now that they don't have to go through that, now that they don't have to conform to that, because it literally is like prison just for children.
Oh, most schools are even constructed and modeled after prisons these days.
Oh, absolutely. And it's complete BS. It's complete BS that people are falling for this and still calling for, oh, we need more money for public schools. Oh, we need more money for the children. No, oh God, no, that's the dumbest thing ever.
Now here's an excerpt from the article I found particularly interesting. Why were our children so anxious? Peter Gray, research professor of psychology at Boston College and author of the book Free to Learn, suspected that the school closures are a big contributing factor to the happiness spike. School has become more achievement focused, which of course they're achievement focused because that's how they get funding from the government, and recess and opportunities for creative play have shrunk. He said that suicide rates for children are twice as high during the school year than they are during the summer. Make matters worse, children
I wonder why.
Making matters worse, children are rarely offered much of a reprieve after the bell rings. So basically, what's going on is you have a mental health crisis in the US. And mental health, of course, has been linked to alcohol abuse, drug abuse, suicide, and violent behavior, including, for example, the mass shooters that we've seen throughout the country. It's almost as if government schools are literally killing us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, but don't worry. The experts know what's best for you. So when the schools do open eventually, just make sure to put them back in the indoctrination camps. They'll be fine. Just give them Ritalin, and they'll sit down and shut up.
You know, I'm looking through the comments and seeing how many people are talking about what a horrible experience they had in school. I mean, honestly, I'm trying to think back of all the people I've ever talked to about grade school, middle school, high school. Who really can look back on that experience and say, I loved going to school. It was the best time of my life. Anybody? Has anyone ever met anyone who said that?
Me personally, I've always contemplated what it would be like to go back in time and experience, like, knowing what I know now, what I could have said in certain situations, what I would have done. But then I realized I would really not want to, even if given the option, at no cost to myself, because I realized I would have to go through government schools again. And that alone is just absolutely sickening to me.
I see Elk Steely says, I had some fun times in high school. Well, I certainly did too, but none of it was in a classroom.
I mean, most of what I learned was in a actually, I would read articles and do research during my lunch period in high school during a senior year, and that's basically how I know a lot of the stuff that I know today. Granted, it's only like a small sliver of what I know today, but it was still a contributing factor that I would argue made me what I am right now. I didn't learn it in government schools. I learned it in unstructured time that I carved out for myself. Who would have thought?
All right, well, we're getting near the end of the top of the hour here. If anybody has any questions, now's the time to put them in the chat. Can't promise we'll get to all of them, but if I see anything I feel like we need to address, I will have a look.
Yeah, let me see here. I will never understand the school worship from Joel Tad. Why would anyone enjoy that? I think for some people, it's just they don't know any better. They can't. They're so institutionalized, to borrow the Shawshank Redemption idea, that they simply become well adjusted to a highly broken system. And for them, it's like not being part of that is so bizarre and so unusual that they wouldn't know how any other way to learn, any other way to live. And I like what Fusion asks here. Do you think public schools will recover from this? No.
Hopefully not.
What I think is going to end up happening is that there is going to be a significant spike in homeschooling. Not like that it becomes the norm, but it's like, I don't know, like what's the rate of parents who homeschool in the United States today? Like 5%, 10%? For the sake of argument, let's say it's 5%. I think we'll see that number spike from 5% to 10 or 15%. It's going to be significant, but it hardly will be the kind of overtaking that you and I would definitely love to see. And however, I think it's going to be very difficult for government schools to open, especially since municipalities are basically guaranteeing that any chance of them opening is going to make themselves a target for legal liability should there be a coronavirus outbreak.
I think more and more online private education systems will emerge as a result of demand as well. Now, granted, I don't think the public schools are going down without a fight. I think coming into this next school year, as more and more parents will start taking advantage of these online private school systems, there will be harsh words from public teachers unions about the need to about the dangers of public schooling and how to outlaw and how important it is that we outlaw these private education online systems. But again, the thing is, once the cat's out of the bag, you can't put it back in. Once people see how effective this is, it's going to be extremely difficult to get people to go back to the status quo.
And Pumpkin Row asks you to please do your best Batman voice.
Yes, Pumpkin Row, thank you very much for the super chat. So let's see here. Can I do a Batman voice? All right. I am Batman.
Where are the drugs? Where are they keeping the drugs? Where are they keeping the drugs, 2 cents?
And he will appear. Do you feel in charge? And this gives you power. No, wait. Wrong character. Never mind.
What?
That was Night Shift doing his best Bane.
It ends here.
Where are the drugs?
Just showed you its capacity for good. What did you do?
Swear to me. Pretty sure you're
right.
there.
Batman.
Well, I suppose that was probably a pretty great note to end on. So thank you again for the super chat. And just again, I'm going to end by saying this. When I was seeking out to name my YouTube channel, I chose the name My Two Cents for a particular reason, because I don't claim to be a scholar. I don't claim to be an expert. I'm just giving you my 2 cents. I don't think any of us claim we're infallible, that nothing we said is wrong. In fact, I'm quite certain that throughout these series of streams, we've said things that will turn out to be incorrect. Nobody is infallible. But you should never uncritically accept any narrative you're given by anyone, especially narratives coming from state-backed media sources that are deliberately trying to silence anyone who has a dissenting opinion, even if all they want to do is question the official state narrative. So live strong, be free, and that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.